Hello and welcome. On behalf of Brazos Bookstore and Inprint Margaret Root Brown Reading Series, we are thrilled to be in the Inprint virtual studio with two of our heroes, Margaret Atwood, who will read from and talk about her new poetry collection, Dearly, and join in conversation with poet Natalie Diaz. We owe great thanks to Margaret and Natalie for being with us this evening, as well as Echo, publishers of this collection. Margaret Atwood read in the Inprint Brown Reading Series in 2000 and 2012, and we're very excited to have her back again. My name is Rich Levy. I'm Executive Director of Inprint, and we thank you for being with us tonight. It's fitting that Brazos and Inprint are co-presenting this event, as Brazos Bookstore has been our beloved reading series bookseller since 1980. After a furious late summer and fall, 7 incredible author events in the last 2.5 months, this 40th anniversary season of the Inprint Margaret Root Brown Reading Series will take a much needed break until February, when we will bring together novelists Lily King and Chang-Rae Lee, and 2 nights in April, one each with novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen and poet Jericho Brown. Plus, we have 2 additional extraordinary reading series events in March and May, about which we can't yet share the details, but please stay tuned for further info to imprinthouston.org. In addition to this series, Inprint presents Cool Brains, a reading series for middle grade children, plus workshops for aspiring writers and free community workshops across the city for senior citizens, school teachers, healthcare providers, veterans, the incarcerated, and others. Some of these are on Zoom. We present Spanish readings and workshops, a podcast called Inkwell, featuring Latinx writers, and the Inprint Poetry Buskers, who typically write poems at events all over town by request in English and Spanish on typewriters, and now occasionally online. We have an online archive of more than 100 past events, and for almost 40 years, Inprint has provided fellowships and prizes to some of the world's top emerging authors at the University of Houston Creative Writing Program and undergraduate writers at Rice University. All this and more at imprinthouston.org. The Inprint Margaret Root Brown Reading Series is made possible by the Brown Foundation. This series is named for one of its founders, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Inprint also receives generous support from the Jerry C. Deering Family Foundation, Houston Endowment, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. The way this will work tonight, Sis Johnson, our friend, will introduce Margaret Atwood, who will read from and talk about Dearly, and then have a conversation about the book, poetry, whatever else, with MacArthur Foundation fellow Natalie Diaz. Natalie's second book, Post-Colonial Love Poem, we're thrilled to say, is a National Book Award finalist. She is an enrolled member of the Gila River Indian Tribe, currently teaches at the Arizona State University Creative Writing Program, and we were honored to present her this past June with Reginald Dwayne Betts as part of our 39th season. Sis Johnson, in addition to being a Brazos Bookstore owner, is also a longtime Inprint board member, past president and chair, and she's also chair emeritus of the board of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership. A former high school English teacher, excuse me, Sis's love of literature was ignited at Vanderbilt University, where she received both a BA in English and a master's in teaching. Sis, hello.
Hi, Rich. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It's an honor, of course, to represent both Inprint and Brazos, institutions that I love, and to welcome Margaret Atwood to Houston for her 3rd appearance in the Margaret Root Brown Reading Series. The series is world-renowned, and our beloved Brazos Bookstore certainly has a national reputation. It has hosted author events for decades, and in recent years, seen the number grow to over 200 events annually. Now, with the precautions taken for the pandemic, we've had to adapt, like everyone. The silver lining is the ease with which we can host authors from around the globe, including Canada's most famous writer, Margaret Atwood. Enormously popular with readers in the US, Canada, and around the world, Margaret Atwood has published more than 50 books, including 16 volumes of poetry, 17 novels, 10 works of nonfiction, 7 books for children, and 3 graphic novels. Quite a canon. She has received numerous literary awards, including the Booker Prize, the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and the Governor General's Award twice. Having achieved both popular and critical acclaim in the literary world, she is also highly regarded in the feminist and environmental communities, where she has used her voice to support these causes. That voice is strong in this new volume of poetry entitled Dearly. Though the title at first feels like someone reaching out to hug, one soon discovers that the poems embrace themes of male violence and environmental degradation. One critic writes about a strong shiver of greatness in the poems. It takes us by surprise, moving swiftly from a simple observation or memory of a long ago school lesson, a drawer full of old passports, a bird dead after flying into window glass, toward a profound and stunning recognition both of the crisis of uncontrollable change humanity now faces and of the inexorable power of aging and mortality. My own experience with her poetry and her prose is that in both, the appeal is consistently connecting the personal and the universal. When a friend told me recently that she couldn't imagine reading The Handmaid's Tale in this environment, something I was doing at the time, I replied that the beauty of the writing and the deeply personal lens on what is happening keeps the reader aloft. Similarly, as I look at my own aging hands, I find Blackberries, the final poem in Dearly, comforts me as someone who annually picks blackberries on the Texas coast, but knows that won't be forever. Margaret Atwood helps us all to see better the contours of our lives. While we look forward to the day when we can all be together in the same room, celebrating literature and books as a community, for now, please help me in giving Margaret Atwood a warm, virtual Houston welcome to read from Dearly. Thank you so much for being here, Margaret. It's an honor.
And thank you for that lovely introduction. I wish I were there in person, but there are some things you can do when you're not there in person that you can't do when you are. So I'm going to try to do a couple of those things for you. And are you going to now vanish from the screen and it will just be a great big me?
I think so. If our technical, I'm not in charge of that, but I hope our technical wizard will do that. Hooray!
All right. So what can I do for you from this room where I do quite a lot of my writing that I couldn't do if I were standing on a stage in Houston, however much fun that would be, and let us hope will be. So I can show you, for instance, the artwork that's on the cover of Dearly, which you can see much better this way. It's made of staples. So that's what is actually on the cover, a flower made of staples. And it was lovingly put together by the cover artist. His name is Allison me see where we are. It says cover art. This is something else that wouldn't happen on, it's Alison Fauché. So I can show you the cover. I can show you some of the manuscripts of the poems. So I write in longhand, and I put the longhand poems that often look something like this, or they might look something like that. I put them in a folder, and when the folder gets quite full, I turn them into TypeScript, and then they look something like that, having looked something like that. And all of this takes place. There's a drawer right over there in this room, and that's where I keep these folders. And I type them up and obsess over them, lay them all out on the floor, and try to decide what order they should be in. And when that's happened for long enough, it turns into a book. And this is the book. So you mentioned old school lessons. So I did write a poem about my high school health teacher in 1953. It's called Health Class, 1953. It's pretty simple. She is speaking. Girls, 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 simmer down. This is not a three-ring circus. This is a classroom. Today we will talk about blood. Silence, please. You think I can't see you from up here? I know your tricks and slurs. I know your whispers. I know where you'd rather be and your favored postures, all your sprawls. You like to pretend I'm funny, but I frighten you. I, who was once pink gelatin, am now a cold gray moon waiting in your future. You'll need me then. I'll turn my bone face toward you. I'll give dry light. I'll read you the first poem. I was going to call the whole book Late Poems, but I changed my mind. But this is a poem called Late Poems, and it is a late poem. These are the late poems. Most poems are late, of course, too late, like a letter sent by a sailor that arrives after he's drowned. Too late to be of help, such letters, and late poems are similar. They arrive as if through water. Whatever it was has happened. The battle, the sunny day, the moonlit slipping into lust, the farewell kiss. The poem washes ashore like flotsam. Or late, as in late for supper. All the words cold or eaten. Scoundrel, plight, and vanquished. Or linger, bide a while. Forsaken, wept, forlorn. Love and joy even. Thrice gnawed songs, rusted spells, worn choruses. It's late. It's very late, too late for dancing. Still, sing what you can. Turn up the light. Sing on. Sing on. It's not all gloom, however. This is a poem about late night movies. So, having been a young person in the 50s and early 60s, I saw a lot of B movies before they were turning up at night on Rotten Tomatoes at midnight. So how about one called The Aliens Arrive? It's in the section that also has werewolves, zombies, and drones. Update on werewolves 54. No, we don't want that one. We want the aliens arrive. The aliens arrive. 9 late night movies. In the 50s, the aliens were usually a metaphor for communists. But then we got Steven Spielberg, and they stopped being heads in jars and started being quite nice for a while. But we've had all kinds of them. The aliens arrive. 9 late night movies. 1. The aliens arrive. They are smarter than us and carnivorous. You know the rest. The aliens arrive in a mist and a fine drizzle. They want to help us, or so they say. Then there's a pop, a sizzle. It was a plot. But why? A few of us are left alive after they go away. 3. The aliens arrive. Their leader is a giant head. It lives in a large glass jar. It wants to mesmerize us, the Lord knows what for. Oh, wait a minute. It's a metaphor. 4. The aliens arrive. A white light shines from their pod, which is shaped like a huge football. Are they God? 5. The aliens arrive, but not in the way you think. They make their way out through our armpits. There is screaming non-stop. Things get way too pink. 6. The aliens arrive in something that looks like a hubcap. In fact, it is a hubcap, vintage 1955. So that's where that thing went. It wasn't in the garage. You lied. 7. The aliens arrive. They're ultra-clever octopi who speak in blots of ink. They want us to be kind to one another worldwide. First time ever. Or else. Or else what? Is this a hopeful sign? What do you think? 8. The aliens arrive. They've heard about human sex, but don't believe it. At great risk to themselves, they've come to see. They send down spies in the shape of flying eyes that peek in through our windows. Oh, anthropology, the horror, the surprise. What a show. It almost makes them ill. What a thrill. They abduct 100 humans through a cosmic straw and slurp us to another planet and put us in a zoo. Unless you have sex on demand, you don't get fed. They say the equivalent of ah and ooh. Also, ha-ha. Dire what hunger will do. It's sex, sex, sex every 2 hours, alternating with egg sandwiches and beer. Be careful what you wish for. 9. The aliens arrive. We like the part where we get saved. We like the part where we get destroyed. Why do those feel so similar? Either way, it's an end. No more just being alive. No more pretend. Where is Natalie? There.
Hello. Gracias for that beautiful reading.
Well, it's kind of an odd reading. I didn't read the really quite sad and gloomy ones.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the atmosphere of our world is making up for some of that. So it was a great place to start, I think. Yeah, it's my luck to be here again. Gracias, Rich and Sis. Yeah, and for the book, this beautiful book, I'm going to just try to move with some of the things that I've been thinking about in this work. And because I'm, I say primarily, but in some ways I mean only a poet, I think, of course, a lot etymologically. And I mean, this book I was so struck by momentums of prophecy that were happening. And I like to think, of the prophet, right? There are so many characters, struck throughout. There's augury, there's Cassandra. Yeah, and so I'm thinking a little bit about some of that, but also, of course, related to the word prophet, which is, of course, goes back to the word early Latin, like vates, poet. So it makes it feels very connected to me, whereas I'm used to reading your prose as having what we kind of think of, at least, as like a possibly prophetic, situated sometimes in looking forward toward what might happen by looking sideways at what is happening in some of these stories, and to see that come into the book of poems as well. And so I wanted, if you're up for it, to kind of start with that space. And I'm thinking, I guess I'll introduce this thought as well. And Sis had mentioned thinking of the title, Dearly. And you had talked about possibly thinking of titling all the poems as late poems. And the title of the book struck me with Dearly, in that at once we're used to, I think, in our regular lexicons, to think of what we hold close or tender. And we sometimes forget about the cost. So the closer you're holding these things, there's also an implied cost for those things. And at times it had meant that there was a certain kind of danger of love, of desire, of holding close, and then the danger that exists when some of those relationships shift. And so I'm wondering just some of the ways that you're thinking or relating to the poems in terms of that, like that wager always that happens in life, but then to bring it to the page, like what we hold close, and then the cost of either side of those things.
Yes, if you love it, you can lose it. So, as the Victorians used to say. So when I'm writing a novel, I like to devise a birth date for each of my characters, and I like to devise not only their birth date, their year, but I also like to devise their month, and I like to make a little horoscope for them, which helps me to understand them better. So that was something I've been doing since the 60s. When you used to have to do it by hand, now you can have a website. You can put in there, you got this nice chart, but mine were hand drawn, and therefore I always like to know what year people were born in. So, what year were you born in, Natalie?
I was born in 1978.
Wow, Natalie, that is amazing. So you are, okay, 78. So then I put the birth date on the left-hand side of a page, and then I put the years across the top. So I can say then that you were 10 in 1988, and you were 11 when the Berlin Wall came down. So you must remember that quite clearly. You must remember that people were making this fuss about it, but you probably didn't quite understand why they were making such a fuss. Why was it such a big deal? And then you were a teenager in the 90s, where it was sort of, people were even saying things like the end of history, and there won't be any ideologies anymore and things like that. Did you believe that?
I did not. I'm lucky in some ways. I have a loophole in that I have, I of course have my Catholicism from my father, and then I also have my native belief system, which in some ways keeps me very literally grounded. So,
You're
and
quite balanced.
yeah, and if the world was going to end in some ways, I think we would be very ready for the origin that would happen after. So,
yes,
yeah.
but you didn't think that human history was just going to be shopping for forever after, because those were the terms that they were talking in. We weren't going to have the Cold War anymore, and globalization would happen, and it was all going to be quite happy, and then there was 9/11. So when there was 9/11 in 2001, you were a young female person of, let us say, a new adult. So that must have been very shocking for you. Yeah, shocking. Like no big cataclysm like that had happened in your lifetime, anywhere close to your country. And it was pretty shocking for all of us. And then the next shock was the 2008 financial meltdown. And during this period, we could notice attitudes shifting. And we could then, if you were tracing a line, you could trace that line to the 2016 election. And there you are in Phoenix, Arizona, right at the vortex of this election that has been going on. It seems that election really took quite a long time, Natalie. Up in Canada, we were just biting our fingernails looking at Arizona. So quite an experience that you have had. If you were a character in a novel, you would be very well situated to be shocked by quite a few things. So taking that back, me as a character in a novel, I was born in 1939. So that means that I'm about to turn 81. And when you're about to turn 81, your poems are late poems because you have a lot less future than you have past. Right at this moment, Natalie is situated about in the middle. Let us say you're at the fulcrum. You've got quite a lot of past, enough to be interesting. But you can also, let us hope, are looking forward to quite a lot of future. Whereas I'm at the sort of, if it were a teeter-totter, I would be at the sort of far end of one of those planks. And that does give you a different perspective.
Yeah, in my Mojave culture, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so struck by the poems in the book, and especially that I when I first read those lines about the late poems, it's almost like I kept happening again, because in my Mojave culture, we have a term that we say, I was dreamed to arrive there. And I think that's why thinking of what is prophetic, of what is known, but yet that can never be, and that, or what has happened but can never be believed of something like grief. Like, what might I tell anybody of it that would be believable from me? But in Mojave, we say, I will arrive, like it's dreamed before, so I will arrive there. So in some ways, when I opened this book and saw late poems, in a way, for me, they don't feel necessarily late because I imagine them having been there the whole time, and that I am the one who is late to arrive to them. And so,
yeah.
And it was such a lucky way to move through your book. And again, that's, I think, why, like, I came back to Cassandra, and even thinking about the use of aliens, but thinking a little bit about how I feel you shifting time so much. And like you and I have very different, perspectives of what is time or experience. And I think for me, one of the things I'm really interested in is like that idea of being late to what is unavoidable. And then once what is unavoidable happens, how does that shift, and what becomes close and possibly inextricable of nostalgia and grief? And I think that felt like a generous space in the poems that I was moving through, of what was nostalgia and what was grief, and how those lexicons felt so tethered to me. And it seemed like, again, such a generous space to think about. And even tethering, Cassandra considers declining the gift. And for those who are reading along with us, I think that's on page 30. But that alongside the poem Within, and those ending lines, which I felt like a physical touch, though not me, I'm still outside. And there was something about that contracted.
a number of the poems towards the end of the book are, of course, about my partner who died in September of 2019. But the poems were written before that happened. However, we knew that it was going to, so it is exactly as you say. These are events foreseen, so that by the time you actually arrive at them, you know what they're going to be. There is an Inuit word from way up north in Canada, which means, I'm told, feeling nostalgia for something that hasn't happened yet. Does that make any sense to you?
It does. We talk a lot about moving backward to see forward.
Mm-hmm. So missing something that has not yet arrived. Sort of other way of thinking about it. Yeah. So both of us knew that this was going to happen, but we didn't know just exactly precisely when, but we knew the parameters of when that would likely happen. So that's the background of some of those poems.
I mean, there's also there's a way that feels familiar to me in the ways I was brought up about the human or physical flesh body that is happening in these poems. And even it's an engagement with sex and desire, and sometimes the bifurcation of those two things, that there's sex that is sex, and then there's sex that is desire, or there's desire that is working in some other way. And there's such a compelling relationship that I feel like is really challenging where the center of our lives are. And in some ways, it feels like a kind of critique of the human body, in that it feels like an inadequate vessel at times, and we even move to insects in some ways to get it even closer to sex than we might in our own bodies, which I sometimes can't imagine. When you're in the throes of any kind of emotional touch, right? Whether it's friendship and holding a hand, or your mother, or a lover, that you find those moments when you want to be so close, you might want to be like inside the other person, like just, those kind of physicalities. And there's a way in your poems as you're moving that the body in some ways, I mean, I keep thinking about the cicada husks, those shells, and there's a way I think that I was able to find the smallness of what my life might be in the scope of desire. And that in some ways and this is what I meant about saying it feels familiar to me, is that there's a line that you say about the body, while coming to no good, you say. So again, I'm going back to the Cassandra, but while coming to no good. And I felt like when the body can come to good, it would be returning to a space before the body. And that's a kind of desire I feel like I'm seeing in the poems, a desire for life that sometimes moves through sex, sometimes moves through grief, and very much is moving through a kind of natural world.
Oh, yes, very much, because that is where we are. We're not people over here, nature over there. We're breathing nature every time we take a breath. So that is, I suppose, comes from growing up in it rather than apart from it. But nobody is apart from it. Even if you're living in a condo with air conditioning, you're not apart.
Yeah, I keep thinking of in the last poem, Blackberries, the berries in the sun are the smallest. And then it's that shadow. That line still, like, I think about that line just in a day. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up so that I don't miss. So let's see. Some berries occur in sun, but they are smaller. It's as I always told you, the best ones grow in shadow. And for me, that that was that cycle. And even hearing you talk about myself as a character in time, what cycles and what origins have to happen, after every movement, whether it's love or desire or grief or absence, that there's a new origin in each one of those moments. Yeah, that felt really kind of just it really opened me to, I guess, thinking of the mythologies of the body, and how those work among us, what we must tell ourselves of the body of earth, of the body of water, of our own human body, and how those play out, or then how we have to then retell them.
Yes, everybody's inventing new viewpoints all the time. So you can go back and look at the backs of old comic books, and what you will find, among other things, is some ads that were supposed to make you less smelly. Yeah, right after the war, you weren't there, Natalie, or you weren't there in your present form. Right after the war, soap was very big. And the reason it was very big was that there had been shortages of it. So all of a sudden, when there was all this soap and toothpaste and things that had been in short supply, people just got very hooked on them. That's the age of the soap opera. And it was the age of the soap opera because soap was making so much money. So the standards of how bodily sort of chemically clean you had to be, that went, the bar was raised, and people started thinking of their bodies as these things that had to be confined and purified all the time. So that's just an example of one viewpoint. I found an old Girl Scout handbook from the 30s, and it said how often you should wash your hair. Okay, so you should wash your hair every 2 weeks. And what does that tell you? It tells you that in the place where this handbook was, which was in the Maritimes of Canada, people didn't have indoor plumbing. So in order to do all this hair washing, that was a production. You had to heat the water, you had to put it in a receptacle. This was not just something you might do every day at all.
And even think about that in terms of sensuality.
Oh yeah, very different views. I like to read. There's a woman who writes books one is called How to Be a Victorian and one is called How to Be a Tudor. And she goes back and lives in the material culture that was available to people at that time. So how they slept, what they ate, what they drank, what their clothes were like, how you put those on, what they were made out of, what was available to you, how rich you would have to be to have a certain item. And then she tells us what it was like to live that way. And that's always been pretty interesting to me because I grew up in several different ways. I grew up in the woods where there wasn't any electricity or running water, and then also in cities where these things were just taken for granted. So how people manage, what you do every day, where do you think your food comes from, things like that. We lived on a farm for 10 years, and we grew our. We had a big kitchen garden, and we also had animals, and we ate them, Natalie.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the right person. So, yeah. Well, and it's interesting too to think about only washing your hair twice, because my people have many stories about some of the first non-natives who came into our area, and many of the names we gave them had to do with their scent or that they weren't clean, even though we were the ones called unclean. But we grew up along the water, so we had a very different way of, we had like the physical cleansing, and then we also had, of course, like a cleansing that did not involve necessarily like the skin. And I mean, I'm thinking of this because I had underlined many moments. I'm thinking of many moments of scent that were happening through the poem. And I was very much engaged with, of course, and compelled by the way that sex is presented and as a kind of emotional lesson, right? And I guess what I mean by that is like, when I'm reading these poems, like I'm engaging with what sex and desire can teach us of the emotional landscapes that we've encountered or will encounter. And I'm thinking a lot, for example, about betrayal. And I mean, there's myriad stories, right? There's myriad stories throughout time about betrayal and what it's supposed to mean. And I read this line to my partner from the poem, of course, Betrayal. And she told me, don't get any ideas, but they're in tercet. So the first, when you stumble across your lover and your friend naked or on your bed, there are things that might be said. Goodbye is not one of them. And that was like a lightning bolt. And I kept thinking about that the way that, again, back to the body, right? Body and sensuality, that I feel like I'm so trying to infuse, from my perspective, desire into everything, and to see, and not that desire is not there, but to see the body in its acts of sex, and to then watch resound what that can teach you of a life, or can teach you of how you might be alongside. Because I think we complicate things with desire or jealousy or all of these myriad words, but what if it just stayed there, body on body and body, and and moved in that way? And at the end of that poem, I just want to mention at the very last line, caught in the glare of your stare. And just even using that glare, in that it at once, elucidates something and also makes something difficult to look at or focus in on. And I kept just reading that through. I kept going back through those poems and thinking about the complexity of that. And that usually we think of sex as being apart from our emotional scape, whereas in many moments it became the pathway through so many emotions that occur.
You're having a very interesting life right now.
I've projected into your book.
Okay, so write this down on a little piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and put it in a drawer. Wait 40 years. It's going to look different.
Yeah, everything, huh?
I say to the kids under 20, or boo-hoo, boo-hoo, the most awful thing happened to me. My boyfriend broke up with me. I said, just, wait 10 years. When you're 30, it'll look different. When you're 40, you'll probably think this is funny. When you're 60, you won't be able to remember that guy's last name. And when you're 80, you'll probably have forgotten all about it, but maybe not. However, you will have a different perspective. I saw Romeo and Juliet, a good production in which the characters actually played the ages they were. Sometimes you get them played as older people, like 18, 20. It doesn't work. You just think they're crazy. But if they're being played as the ages they are, like about 14 and 16, it's, of course, I'm going to kill myself. My parents hate me. Why can't he climb up to my, I'm running away. Of course. But if people do that when they're, 25, you think, oh, take a pill. So it
Well,
does.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so tethered, right? Like you had mentioned Arizona, where I am right now, and the election we're in right now. And, there's a way that we've so complicated our relations among one another. Like we've so dislocated ourselves. Like I think
Right.
first from land and our natural world, and then from one another. And even that, like, I mean, that line to me resounds like goodbye is not one of them. There are things that might be said. Like we're stuck with one another here in this climate of thought and religion and violence and touch and we can't say goodbye to one another. I mean, some people will find certain kinds of escape, but this is the lands and waters we're going to be sharing at some point, as we are now in some way. And so I'm thinking a lot about that as well, is just that you've brought us back to the elemental in some ways of the flesh, in ways that we seem to have lost that language. Like, for example, who would we be today if some of the ways of those Victorian handbooks and that Girl Scout handbooks were the ways that we tended to ourselves? What then might we know of one another, especially thinking of scent of all things. But so I think it's so important, the way that that's glancing toward our lack of certain languages for the time that we're in now. We have so many words, right? We're super loquacious. But
yeah, well, there's a political language which is quite removed from quite a few things. But I think what people have to come back to realizing is that each person who voted, each person who didn't vote, they're all individual human beings. So, and they all have a way of being on the planet, which is probably going to be often quite difficult for people who voted in some other way to understand. And you read all sorts of articles about people trying to delve into this, like, why do people think this way? Where did they get these ideas? What is it that they're afraid of? Because it seems to me that a lot of this comes out of fear. And let me just interject at this moment that the worst thing that could happen to the United States right now would be some kind of civil war. Civil wars are always the worst. And if that does happen, other countries will take advantage. They will not be shy about that. So I think one of the things that people in your country have to think about is, how much of a collapse do you want to have as a nation? And if you don't want to have a collapse as a nation, you're going to have to start understanding more about the other people in that nation. And as you are a Catholic, you will understand that one of the big deals in Christianity is the ability to forgive. So let us see the people who are putting up their hands for being Christian. Let's see if they can do that.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I'm also Mojave, so I get to decide when I'm going to be or when I'm going to be Mojave. But and I mean, even thinking about rebuilding, like, what do we want to rebuild? Like, what does need to collapse? And who will we be in certain kinds of collapse?
Is it going to be rebuilding, or is it going to be building? So I think it's probably going to have to be more like building, because some of those things you don't particularly want to go. I mean, I wouldn't particularly want to go back to if I were you. And being Canadian, I always did kind of wonder, make America great again. When was that?
Yeah. Before it was America.
Well, so it's made the birth dates and the years across. So dialing back, exactly when was that? what are we supposed to be looking back to that was great for everybody?
Yeah, and there's a way there's a way also, I think, that the escalation of, I think, any nation, there are some that do this differently, that the escalation of any language or any power structure, that there's also a way of considering that in terms of like, how do we step out of that time? And I think that's something as well, is like everybody who is in conversation right now has a different beginning, a different beginning for their wounds, a different beginning for their, for the parts of their lives that have been abundant, a different beginning for their, memories and nostalgias. And I think that's something that's quite difficult, is to think about those relationships as a kind of momentum. Like, even as you did the timeline in the beginning, like, that's the way that I see time, as a series of momentums, and certain times when I had to be interior or exterior, when I didn't know, or when I thought I was acting, I remember the Berlin Wall. And as a child, I remember thinking that I couldn't let these things happen, but I had no idea how, right? And so, I think there are a lot of like activist movements, and some, like, one of the things that has been really beneficial to me is to see like things like different parts of the abolition movement, is when they break down, we are doing this percentage of dismantling, for example, and this percentage of rebuilding. And just to be able to hold both of those things at the same time, I think is very difficult for the ways a lot of our Western thinkings have evolved. Is that we tend to think of momentum as just moving forward versus the holding and releasing, and that holding is also not stillness, which makes me think a lot, of course, about some of your prose, and also just some of the work and thinking about the climate and how we engage there, because you can't look at it as a single momentous trajectory, or what might we do with the weight of that then.
Okay, so there's two ways of looking at time, as you know, and one of them is that it's linear, and the other one is that it's cyclical. And because we invented Codex books, we have a habit of thinking that there's a beginning, a trajectory, and an end. But if you're not hooked on that form of storytelling, things can be quite different. I don't happen to believe that there's a yellow brick road that leads to the Emerald City of Oz, and that it's inevitable. And I don't believe that, and neither did people in the Middle Ages when they were talking about the Wheel of Fortune. So it wasn't a line, it was a circle. And you might rise on the Wheel of Fortune until you got up at the top, and then you would fall down and get crushed underneath it. Which is why Fortune was spoken of as a very fickle goddess, and you couldn't depend on her. So I think what you're saying is something similar. It's not an inevitable progress. It is something that could just as easily loop back on itself, and it's therefore quite. You can't say that you're on a certain point on the road because maybe it's not a road.
Yeah, thinking across planes, I think, is helpful for me. That there are many things happening at once, among us. So
you're to the three dimensions. Yes.
Yeah, as many as I need, I'll take. So that kind of projection that is, to think forward is in some ways to remember. And it's difficult to hold I think in the English language. I feel like it's, we're always trying to find ways to break that.
English is a language that has a lot of nouns. It has a lot of nouns. It's, French has a lot of verbs and adverbs, adjectives. In German, you can make something into a thing just by changing the word form. And that can get very squirrely. You know, you can sort of thingify something just like that. But I'm told that there are languages in which there aren't nouns exactly. There are gerunds. So something isn't a thing, it's a becoming. It's something in the process of becoming. And usually people can illustrate that by saying, what is this? It's a fist. What's that?
Yeah, ours is often that the verb is, our verbs and nouns can mix because the thing in some ways is what you do in it or what you do to it. So it's how it animates the body.
It's a becomingness.
Yeah. And the body in some way becoming.
So it's a much more fluid way of looking at reality. Things are merging into other things. They're becoming other things, but they're not solid. Like it's not a lamp, a glass, a table, a stone. But we're stuck with the languages that we have.
Yeah, it's dangerous sometimes, I think, to be dangerous in very, not in a value judgment way, but just dangerous in terms of, again, of that becoming, right? Like the unknown of what you might be, which I think is also threatens power in some ways. So
You might say things in another way. Well, as you know, 1984 is the seminal text in that respect. So you obliterate reality by limiting language, and we have all done that in our lives, and politicians do it quite a lot. So acceptable megadeaths. Remember that one?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think of the. Was it the Indigenous American Berserk? Also has been one that's stuck with me.
Where did that come from?
That is Roth. I think it's the Indigenous American Berserk, but I've been trying to steal that for many years, and I'm still I haven't been able to quite yet. So I mean, of course, my definition of berserk would be a little different, and indigenous, of course, but yeah, I mean, I guess that idea that to obliterate and also to make, right? I wonder. Because if we obliterate the language in some ways, what does that mean of what we're making, and how difficult that is to dislocate that or dislodge that in the future, and that's what feels dangerous to me.
If you're a poet, you can't obliterate the language because you need to work with it, but you can recycle.
Yeah, and the shadows are always there, I think, even in an obliteration. So.
Now, what do you mean by an obliteration?
I'm thinking in some ways, I'm thinking a little bit about Francis Bacon's thinking about image when he says, he literally obliterated. And then he talked about imaginatively, he wanted to obliterate each image that came before the image that he was engaged with. And then, of course, he obliterated his actual, paintings and canvases. And I'm thinking a little bit too. I'm thinking of like even in Palestine, there's a lot of architectural work, and I've done some visits there as with writers, but thinking of ruins, like so obliteration of something, but that the ruins are still there in some way, whether it's shadow or the way the ground is tinted or the way trees are somehow situated around what is no longer there. And again, like, what does that mean of return when we're thinking about language? Because I think language making is often remembering from before. There's so much talk about the futurism, like we need to reimagine language or remake it. And I wonder sometimes what might happen if we can somehow find a way to return without having to, or, you know, like reorganization of energy, I guess, which is still that prefix re, but yeah, so thinking about like that something is reorganized.
Whoa, that's a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, these are all leaping out of your book that's in front of me. So
What have I done? Somebody has popped into view.
Hello. This has been an amazing conversation. You know, may I ask, Margaret, would you be willing to read one poem to send us off into the night? And then I can thank you both for this amazing conversation. That would be great.
All right. Do you happy one, a sad one, and a weird one, or a short one?
I'd love it if you'd read personally Blackberries, if you don't mind.
Blackberries. In the early morning, an old woman is picking blackberries in the shade. It will be too hot later, but right now there's dew. Some berries fall. Those are for squirrels. Some are unripe, reserved for bears. Some go into the metal bowl. Those are for you, so you may taste them just for a moment. That's good times. One little sweetness after another, then quickly gone. Once, this old woman I'm conjuring up for you would have been my grandmother. Today, it's me. Years from now, it might be you, if you're quite lucky. The hands reaching in among the leaves and spines were once my mother's. I've passed them on. Decades ahead, you'll study your own temporary hands, and you'll remember. Don't cry. This is what happens. Look, the steel bowl is almost full, enough for all of us. The blackberries gleam like glass, like the glass ornaments we hang on trees in December to remind ourselves to be grateful for snow. Some berries occur in sun, but they are smaller. It's as I always told you, the best ones grow in shadow.
It's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to you both. Margaret, thank you for this beautiful book, and we wish you happy virtual travels with it. And Natalie, thank you for being with us tonight and leading this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
And
thank you both.
Everyone, thank you, Natalie. It was lovely to talk with you, and good luck with everything. And don't forget to write that little note. Okay.
I did 40 years, counting 40 and 40 years. It'll all look different. But yeah, gracias. And dream well, both of you. I was very lucky to spend the evening with you.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you both. Well, folks, that was a thrill. I just want to remind you, if you would, if you're interested in buying another copy of Dearly, this beautiful book, brazosbookstore.com, and check out their events. Please be with us for the rest of this year's series. Further info at imprinthouston.org, where you can also join the Imprint email list, follow us on social media. We hope to see you all soon, truly. In the meantime, thank you again. Have a sweet and safe holiday, and happy reading and writing. Good night.